So it's time to hire your new pastor and your search team doesn't know where to start. You've come to the right place. My name's Craig and I have helped several churches find pastors as well as being a part of several searches themselves. And there are a lot of mistakes that churches make early on and throughout their search that cost them quality candidates and cost them time. In this video, we're going to look at a few simple tips and tricks that are completely free that can help your search team run a better executed, a more professional search so that you can find God's next pastor for your congregation. My first piece of advice is this. Have one point person that all the church trusts that the board has appointed to run your search. You need to have a point person who is all in, who's willing to answer the emails, who's willing to work with denominational leadership if that is something you have to do, who's willing to get on the phone and call candidates, who's willing to follow up with candidates, and who has the trust of your congregation. You really need that one point person because the old adage, too many cooks in the kitchen, and this can definitely bog down your search. If your search team has 5, 6, 7, 8 people on it, and those 5, 6, 7, 8 people think that they're in charge, you will have problems. Rather, no matter the size of your search team, you should have one key point person who's in charge of checking the email, who's in charge of contacting those candidates. This person should be trusted by your congregation. This person should have authority to talk to those candidates and have authority to speak, generally so, for the church in regards to the search matter. Once you've established your search committee and however your church wants to do this, whether it's your general board or you want to establish a subcommittee to search for the new pastor, the first thing that committee should do is figure out what their church is looking for in a pastor. It doesn't matter how you've come to this, whether your pastor has retired or moved on or simply felt called out of the ministry. It doesn't matter how your church got to the point of looking for a new pastor. You still need to figure out what your church is now looking for in a new pastor. Some churches will poll their congregations. Others will look to church leadership and say, what are we looking for in this next season? It's just important that your search team understands what the congregation is looking for. Here's the hard thing, though. You need to be looking for something realistic. And what I mean is this. If you're a congregation of 20, you're probably not going to be able to hire a full-time pastor who's been in the ministry for 30 years and has their doctorate. They're probably going to be looking for something more full-time, and they're probably going to be looking for something that is a more established ministry. So you need to be realistic with your expectations. You need to be realistic with what you can hire, but you should know that before you start the search so that the search committee doesn't return a bunch of candidates where the church body then goes, why did they bring us this person? Once you know what your church body is expecting, you should know as a church body what you can offer and what you're expecting from the pastor long term. What I mean by this is job description, pay package. Way too often, churches go into searches, they have no job description for the potential pastors that are looking at their congregation. So a pastor reaches out and says, hey, I see that the First Church of so-and-so is looking for a pastor. Could you send me your job description? Could you send me your job posting? And what's the potential pay range? And the church responds with, well, we haven't gotten that far. And here's the sad thing. You will lose many serious candidates when that's the answer. Now, we can over-spiritualize pastoral searches and say, why would they be asking about money already? They don't even know who we are, and we just need to see what God is doing. But the truth is, every single job, there's a conversation of, what is the pay range? You don't have to get into deep details with the job description and the pay range, but you should have a general sketch and a general ballpark of each of these before you post your job. This way, the entire search committee is aware. This way, future candidates will be aware. After you have your job description and pay range roughly dialed in with your church body, next it is wise to establish a clear timeline. When do you want to post the job? How long do you want to accept applications for? Once you accept applications, what's going to be the next step? Where are you going to go from there? How long will you give them for each step of the process? What can happen is churches will post their job, and then people will start flooding them with applications. At least that's what you hope for, to get a qualified candidate. But then the search committee doesn't know what to do next. If you have a clear timeline thought out beforehand, then you can walk each candidate through that timeline. And for the candidate, it projects a level of professionality that is not often seen within church searches. It tells them, hey, this church has their business buttoned up. This might be someone that I want to work with. What are some steps you should consider along that timeline? Well, you want to have initial submission for applications. Maybe if you're hiring for a senior pastor, it might be wise to ask each person to send in some clips of their most recent sermons or some sermons that they think represent them in their pastoral voice well. In addition, you might want to have a questionnaire that each candidate fills out. I wouldn't recommend that you would have them do that off the beginning, but rather once you've narrowed down the field. Here's a little tip. Say you are putting out an application for or a call for a senior pastor, and you have 30 people apply. Now, you don't want to give 30 people a 4 or 5 page questionnaire because that is a ton of content that your search team is going to have to go through. Rather, what you would want to do is skim down the candidates. Of that 30, maybe you take 6, 7, or 8 of your top candidates, probably no more than 10, to that questionnaire round. For the rest, you would simply let them know, hey, we didn't choose to move you forward. That's a little tip as well. Clear communication all throughout this process with potential candidates will make your church look great. Seriously, just as simple of, hey, we've received your application. Thank you for applying. Hey, we have decided to move you forward to the next round. Here are the clear expectations. Or, hey, thank you for applying. We decided that this would not be a good fit, and God bless you in your future endeavors. So many churches just leave candidates hanging for months at a time. And the problem with that is you might lose the person that you're really thinking about because you didn't communicate with them. So they've moved on to other opportunities. As far as posting your job, post it broadly. Pay some money for these services. There's several different church staffing websites on the internet. None of them are free, but you get what you pay for. Pay the $100, $200 to post your job to try and get qualified candidates to look at your church. When it comes to what you post, make sure that you lean into what you've already done. You've polled your congregation. You have your point person. You've established your timeline and put that information forward. This is what our congregation is looking for. This is who we're hoping to be. This is who the person we think God is going to call will generally look like and be gifted in these areas. We're hoping for this kind of timeline, and we're hoping for this kind of search to happen. In addition, this is a good time to make sure that your website is polished up, your social media is polished up, because any potential candidate, their first thing they're going to do is check out that website. Their first thing they're going to do is check out that social media. Now, this might not be something that your church has or has done well, and you can think about that. But you should know that just like if you're applying for a private company, you're going to check out information on them first. So spending a week or two polishing up those social media presences, spending a week or two polishing up the website before you post your job is not a bad idea. And here's the truth. You probably have someone in your congregation who's willing to do it. You just need to ask. And so finding that right person to potentially do that is a good idea. Post your job broadly, utilize the services, spend a little money to get preferred listings so that you can find the right candidate. I don't work for any site. I'm just saying this as someone who's gone through this. Usually when we spend a little money, we found a far better candidate in return. Once you've got your candidates in, you've already had your timeline established, you've worked through maybe some questionnaires, and you've done some of these things, my next tip is to stack your interview process. Far too often, search teams will say, hey, we'll set up a Zoom interview with candidate A this weekend and then candidate B next weekend. And then maybe in 2 Thursdays, because Miss Jones can't meet the following Thursday, we'll schedule a Zoom interview with candidate C. And you've just gone an entire month to just Zoom interview, a fairly early step process with these candidates. An entire month has gone by when you could have said, hey, we're going to take a long Saturday morning and have interview with candidate A at 9 a.m., interview with candidate B at 10 a.m., interview with candidate C at 11 a.m., take a quick break for lunch, and then finish up with candidates, D, E, and F in the afternoon. Now, that might seem daunting, and it surely does create a long day, But what could have taken 1 month was just knocked out in 1 day or maybe 2 days. This is what you want to think about for your church's search. How can you stack up and leverage the time that your search team is already together, not stretching things out over months and months and months? Again, quality candidates aren't going to just sit around and wait for you. They're looking at other churches because they might be looking for a job or feel called out of their current situation. And so you want to strike while the iron's hot, so to speak. By the time you've done all of your candidating, you've gotten all of your resumes, you've watched a bunch of sermons, you've done some Zoom interviews, you've submitted questionnaires, whatever the process your team wants to use to narrow down the candidates, I suggest that you bring no more than 1 or 2 or 3 in for an in-person interview. Out of that in-person interview, you really want to bring in your top candidate for your church body. Now, each church is going to have different bylaws of who votes for a new pastor and what that looks like. But once you bring in those 1, 2, or 3 candidates for an in-person interview, your search team should know this is the person that we want to bring forward to our congregation. I would highly recommend that you do not bring more than 1 at a time before your congregation, because then you're going to just be splitting hairs. The congregation has put the search team in charge of bringing a qualified candidate before them. And so it is your job to prayerfully consider who the Lord would have next. And then when you feel like you guys have leading, you bring that person forward to the candidate to meet the congregation, to probably give a sermon, especially if it's a teaching pastor position, to maybe meet with some key stakeholders and leaders, to maybe have a fellowship lunch, whatever you want to do, but you want to bring them forward for that. I highly recommend that any candidate that you bring in to formally candidate, if they're married, have them bring their spouse with them. If possible, maybe their children, young children. It doesn't always work out that way, but you want to know the whole candidate, and their spouse and their family is certainly a part of that. Again, this is why you don't want to bring in 3 or 4 people before your church. You really want to bring that 1 candidate in. Here's the thing though, because you've done all your work, because you've already worked with the candidate and they've seen the job description, they know the pay range, they have made it through several different hoops, but you've run your search effectively, they're already feeling great about your congregation because, man, they communicated with me promptly. Man, they already had a job description and a pay package. I've talked with the same person who is detailed and organized the entire search process. They let me know what step A would be, and then they stuck to their word. They let me know what step B would be, as well as step C, D, and F, and they stuck to their word the whole time. I can't tell you how many churches don't do this, and I don't think it's malicious. Rather, they're not used to hiring pastors, so the search process takes a long time. No one answers emails, and then quality candidates just back away. You want to find God's next pastor for your church, but you also want the best possible pastor you can find for your church. Running a quality search is part of the way to get there. Utilizing just some of the tips and tricks in this video that cost you nothing other than maybe listing with a quality website are just some of the ways you can find God's next pastor and run your search in a professional manner.